So
There we go.
honeybees are from the phylum Arthropodia. Arthropodia means jointed foot. Insecta or Hexapodia means it has 6 legs. So most of we've got, family, the bee family, and then there's subspecies. So we'll be talking a little bit about, different subspecies of bees you can buy, because that can be confusing. Everybody, oh, honeybee's honeybee, right? No, it's not exactly. Apis mellifera is the basically the family name. Insects are classified as having 3 body parts. You've got head, thorax, and abdomen. 3 pairs of legs, 1 pair of antennae, and wings. Honeybees have 2 pairs of wings. So they're insects. But they're not technically bugs. Bugs are one specific family of insects that are mostly plant-sucking insects that are considered harmful, and they're the only ones that are true bugs. So these are insects. So and you can really get into a lot of detail on the anatomy of a bee. So they've got a head with a compound eye, and then they have these 2 little eyes at the top, and they mainly just detect the difference between light and dark. They have antennae, and they have a little gland here in their antennas that help them with orientation when they're flying. They've got, of course, a lower lip, a jaw, upper lip. They've got a tube-like proboscis that they can use to lap up nectar. So they've got a long tongue that'll come out. They've got, their forelegs, middle legs, and hind legs. Their stinger is back here. They have spiracles on the sides of their body, and that's how insects breathe. They have tubes that just passively allow oxygen to circulate through tracheal tubes inside their body. I think Byron briefly mentioned tracheal mites. For a while there, beekeepers were having problems with these little mites crawling in these spiracles, and they'd clog them up, and the bees would basically suffocate. That's also why you don't want to accidentally pour oil or, from your bee blasters onto your bees, or, dump water in there, because you can suffocate them. So there's of course, we've got 2 wings, and this is their abdomen. So head, thorax, and abdomen. On their hind legs, they have little stiff hairs that stick out that they can take and put pollen into. So, according to Theodore Mitchell, who spent 38 years of his life studying bees, they're essential to our economy, chief pollinating agents of flowering plants, and they have a relationship not only to agriculture, but to the conservation of wildlife and game management. Just, the production of almost all fruit crops, like apples, pears, melons, almonds, cucumbers, grapes, all of those require pollination, and honeybees are the best pollinators for these crops because they focus on monoculture bloom. So if they go out to collect from flowers, they like to collect from the same type of flower. They don't use, they won't go from the apple tree to, the oranges to the almonds. They will focus, if they're out there on almonds, they focus on almonds. So, well, if the almonds not producing any nectar or pollen, then they'll move on to a different plant group. but because they will focus on the monoculture to collect from them and what they determine to be the best source. So there might be a plant there that gives good nectar from, but if it's not quite as good as this one over here, they'll focus on whatever is the best. And since they do that, they have all these little hairs on them that have electrostatic charge from flying, that the pollen is attracted to them and stick on them. So they'll carry that from plant to plant. And the plants have actually adapted to where they put their ovaries and anthers in certain places to accommodate getting that pollen on the bee. In fact, some plants even will put like here's a little, attractant here. But you are going to notice that when you reach for that, it's going to bop you with pollen in a different place. It's going to, the plants have came up with ways to utilize insects. There's a plant called bee balm, that it's a Nardia family, and the way it is designed, when the bees land on the lower lip of the plant, the top part with the pollen actually will bop them and put pollen on. It's kind of designed like a little trigger. And then, of course, eventually the bees will use combs and stuff on their legs and pass that pollen back. They've got a little deal on their legs. It's a pollen press. They'll press it and then put it in their pollen basket. Fascinating to go. It's really fascinating. Honeybee subspecies. The German black bee was the main one that was introduced in 1622. The Native Americans called them the white man's fly. They were pretty much wiped out by disease and introduction of other species. So the species will cross with each other. So you can end up with, older species that kind of disappeared. There are some people in Germany that's trying to bring back those genetics. They're, trying to breed back to get something that's closer to the original German black. Most people, when they start out, they try to get the Italian honeybees because they're known to be very gentle. They're usually light golds and browns. They're very productive. They are kind of prone to starvation because they will start building up really strong in the early spring, and a lot of times they will have more bees than they can support. So you have to watch them for that. They also have more susceptibility to varroa mites, and because where they came from over in Italy during the Ice Age, it was blocked off from areas in Russia that had varroa mites. So until varroa mites were spread by man, they had never been subjected to them. So they don't even recognize this pest in their hive. So you have to be a little bit more careful and diligent about making sure you take care of varroa mites if you have Italian bees. But they do produce a lot of honey. It's a very good bee. There's also the Caucasian bee. It's kind of a gray and black. And I've had people when I've been showing them, I've got a mixture of different ones, and you can tell the difference a lot of times in the hive between these different species. So they have more of a gray-black. They're quite as golden. They're gentle. They're not quite as productive as Italian. They do like to build up more propolis in general. Propolis, a lot of people like having hives that have built up a lot of propolis. Propolis
That's
is...
a term I don't know.
Huh?
That's a term I've never heard.
You'll learn more about it, but propolis, according to got his name, I can't think of it right now. Propolis can sell for $60 a pound. It is a natural antibiotic, so people will take it internally. They can use it on wounds. You can get propolis traps and put it on hives to encourage the bees to put propolis in there, and people will sell it. It's kind of valuable, but there's a lot of people that don't know what the heck it is. But you'll learn what it is. For other people, it's like, this annoying stuff that sticks everything together. It's like bee glue. It's bee glue. The Carnolian, it's a dark one. The queens are kind of hard to spot because they're darker. The Italians, the queens have a really golden abdomen, and so a lot of times they're a lot easier to spot. They're thought to be more resistant to varroa mites because where they came from, varroa mites were something that they had to deal with. They're a little bit more conservative in using resources and brood expansion and spring. Russians, which are prominently, have a lot of the Carnolian genes in them. They're from Eastern Russia. The USDA brought in a whole bunch in the 1990s and released them in order to try and recoup some of our feral population that was wiped out due to diseases. Their productivity is comparable to the Italians. They're fairly conservative in spring buildup, but I wouldn't guarantee that because I had a Russian hive that almost starved to death last year. I thought they had plenty, and they started building up too soon. But they didn't start. I got them in time. Okay, Africanized bees, which that's what everybody talks about. The media made a really big deal out of it when they first came in. The killer bees. Now they're talking about the murder wasp. Yeah, so don't ever completely believe anything the media tells you. Yeah. We had a speaker from one of the universities one time that was telling us at the time of there was a time there when there was a rumor going around that cell phones were killing bees. And he had a reporter that came to talk to him, and that reporter tried every way he possibly could to get him to say that cell phones were killing bees. And he kept asking the same question in different ways. Like, finally, he said, the only way that a cell phone can kill a bee is if you smash it with it. Yeah.
But they probably cut that clip down and they said, yep, it kills bees.
I couldn't get him to say it, but it was so funny when he told the story about how many different ways, this reporter tried to get him to say that it might be possible that cell phones were killing bees. So, Africanized bees, where they were actually brought into Brazil to be studied because down there the Italian bees, they weren't doing well in a tropical environment. So a researcher brought them in to study them, and of course he ended up taking the blame, but it was his assistant that let him escape. But now the people down there, they love their Africanized bees because with adding some other genetics and managing them properly, they have become much more gentle and they're very productive. What happened was over in Africa for years and years, they destroy the hives in order to harvest the honey. they'd find a clip with the honeybees in it, and they would kill all the bees in order to harvest the honey. And they did that for so long that the bees adapted to be more aggressive because it was a survival instinct. So actually, people cause Africanized bees. They have changed in their body composition a little bit, and if you send one to a lab, they can actually identify based on, the wings and other small details, whether or not it's an actually full Africanized bee. I tell people that bees in Texas have a little bit more attitude, and it's usually because they have a little bit of Africanized genes in there. But there's a difference between bees being a little aggressive, which happens when the hive gets really big anyway, and being so mean. I had one hive that was usurped this year that when I went to pop it open, it was so mean that I ended up getting 17 stings on my arms through my bee suit. And they were stinging through my gloves. Those were so mean, I did have to kill that hive. But I've had other hives that just got aggressive, and by replacing the queens, they became calmer once her genetics started taking over the hive.
Is that what sometimes happens, is that the hive gains a queen that's an Africanized queen?
On occasion, what happens is an Africanized queen will come in with a small group of Africanized bees, and they will land on the front of the hive, and her workers will go in and find the existing queen and kill them. And then that Africanized queen will just walk in and take over. And that's, it doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. The hive that this did, it was a very productive hive, and I had a really good gentle queen in there. She was marked for the year. I think she was marked green. I'd have to go back to my record. But she was marked, and then the next month, when I checked it, I had an unmarked queen in there. The hive was still gentle. So I thought, well, she must have died and was replaced, but I didn't notice any reduction of brood or anything. Because, once you have a new queen that's replaced, it takes a while for her to be able to lay and produce new bees. So it's like, I didn't see any signs that they replaced the queen. And sometimes they can clean off the dot too. So I went ahead and I marked this queen. A month later I went in and was attacked. So I had to kill it because I didn't want those genetics spread. Huh? Oh.
What's the best way to kill your hive? You get it to kill your hive, or what do you do with containment?
Well, I'd always been told that if you put the hive box in black plastic, that they'll smother. And so that's what I did. But those bees were, I took, it was double D. So I took and put, each box in black plastic trash bags. And those bees were so mean, they chewed holes through that black plastic. So I ended up having to put the black plastic on there and then put a solid board on the bottom and a lid on the top to make it to where they couldn't get out. And then just let it sit out there and they suffocated. The other way is to take each frame and, shake the bees off into soapy water or spray them with soapy water. But they were so mean that I wasn't going to stand there and take those out. In order to be able to work with them at all, I had to put on rubber gloves, then my bee glove, a long sleeve shirt underneath and they were still just clustering all over my veil and it was was awful. It was awful.
Tell me, are honeybees are a light attracted, in, a light attracted insect? Is that correct? Or do you know?
Yeah, they like.
In other words, if you were to take a spotlight.
Yeah, they'll come out to a spotlight,
working.
in the evening, when it starts getting dark, a lot of times they like to come into my garage, and if I leave the lights on, they'll be in the garage after dark. I have to turn the lights off, leave the garage door open a little bit longer, so that they will leave and go home so I can shut the door. And they like coming to my garage because I have bee equipment. They're attracted to that.
What do you mean when you say you mark?
In order to make it easier to see a queen, and also it's a management technique, you put a little dot, a colored dot on their thorax in order to be able to recognize your queens, and there's different colors for different years. So we'll go over that more.
Oh, animal thing, or what is it? You got marking pins.
Yeah, you got marking pins.
Marking pins.
So for instance, this year it's white. So it's a special pin that you get in order to put that little dot on, and it's a little. It takes a while to build up confidence to do that. Let's put it that way. It's not something you're going to be doing next week. Okay. All right. So there's also subspecies like R-weaver. They sell a bee that they call buckfast bee. The buckfast bee was developed by Brother Adams over in England, I believe it was. And his goal at the time was to produce a bee that was resistant to tracheal mites. But then they also say that it's resistant for what they call Varroa syncytial. So they call this bee buckfast bee and say that it's better with the, but they don't have any real data to back that up. But you will see that term when you're looking at, especially if you look for bees that are weaver, is they say that they're buckfast genetics. But I don't know how they keep them that way, because queen bees are open-mated. They fly out and they meet with available drones, and they mate with multiple drones. I don't know how our weaver can guarantee that their genetics are pure, and I don't know that they do any genetic testing. But you will see that term. This is a new one that they've come up with. It works better in colder climates, but they developed it in northern California. They use it a lot up in, Canada. You'll see that term, the saskatraz. I wouldn't really recommend that for our area, because it's really was developed to be a cold weather bee. But you'll see that term. You'll see that hybrid. A lot of these bees are guaranteed as far as their genetics, because they do artificial insemination of the queens. Now talk about something that's tricky. That's not something I'm going to try. But they have done. They do that. They do some and when they do that, those artificially inseminated queens cost thousands of dollars. And some beekeepers, breeders, will buy artificially inseminated bees in order to have a mother queen to help introduce certain genetics into their bees that they're raising and selling. honeybees is big bucks now. Big bucks out there for, you know, in some areas. For hobby beekeepers, nah. It's going to cost you big bucks. But that's relative too, because, you know, I usually tell people it's going to cost you about $1,000 for your first time. By the time you get all your equipment, your bees, and everything you need, you know, you're going to spend about $1,000. Well, that's a hell of a lot cheaper than my husband's bath boat cost. And it's a lot cheaper than most people pay for, you know, their golf greens and their golf carts. So, you know, so when you think of it that way, fishing and beekeeping can be relatively cheap if you're fishing from the bank. Beekeeping can be relatively cheap if you only got a couple of hives. So all honeybees come from eggs. They all develop into larvae. They go through metamorphosis, and the development time for all honeybees differ by caste. So let's take a little look at each of those. So complete metamorphosis, you guys probably learned this about butterflies when you were in grade school. You got an egg, you got larvae, you got a pupa, and then it becomes an adult. So a queen honeybee can lay over 2,000 eggs in a single 24-hour period. They don't always lay that many, but when they're in high production, usually in the early spring, they'll be laying 2,000 eggs a day. If your math's good, you can multiply this by 10, 20, 30, 40 days, which is the general lifespan of worker bees. The eggs are deposited in cells, and if you got good eyesight, you can see at the bottom of the cell, it will look kind of like a little teeny tiny grain of rice standing there. Larvae in the cells look a little like little pearly worms. You have the body is comprised of a head plus 13 ring-like segments or divisions. It grows to fill the cells very quickly between the day it emerges from the egg until it reaches its 5th day of development. It will grow 6 times its body weight during each 24-hour period of development. Healthy larvae should look white, kind of pearly white, and glisten with moisture. Then it becomes a pupa. The larva starts standing up in the cell, head up, and it'll start going through metamorphosis. When the cell is capped, when it starts going into pupa cell, the worker bees will cap the cell. They will seal it up. And then it goes through its metamorphosis, and then once it becomes an adult bee, you'll see it will start chewing its way out of that cell. You can see it sometimes when you're looking at frames. You'll see this little bee down there, and you'll see its little mandibles going, you know, chewing a little hole and sticking its head out, and the other worker bees will come around. It looks like they're going, come on, you can do it. You know, it's like they're encouraging them. Sometimes if they get hungry while they're doing it, they'll stick their tongue out, and, you know, worker bees will feed them. So you've got the workers, which are all female. The queen, of course, is female. And then you've got drones, and those are the males. The queen is a mature, fertile female. She develops from a fertilized egg, so any potential egg can be turned into a queen, because they're all fertilized and they're female. But normally a hive only has one queen. She mates once in her life, and with multiple drones, and you know, they say on average it's at least 14 when she mates. She stores the sperm from the drones in her spermacapia and can lay fertilized eggs, fertilized or non-fertilized. She can choose what she's laid. She's the mother of all the bees laid in the hive. She can live up to 5 years, but that lifespan is not normal anymore. I think it's probably because of the stress and stuff that we have. A lot of times you're doing good if she makes it 3 years. A lot of beekeepers, as a part of their management, will replace their queens every year. Most commercial beekeepers just automatically replace their queens every year. I've had some queens that lived about 3 years and have done really well, and I've had some that, the second year they kind of peter out, or by the third year they are. It's one of the reasons to mark them, is so that you can tell how old that queen is, and keep an eye on her to make sure that if she started to get weak, to see that she's replaced.
But they can naturally replace.
Yeah, they can naturally replace. There's always a risk that when that queen flies out to mate, that she ends up on somebody's windshield. Yeah, or is picked off by a robber fly or something. It can happen. Or if the weather's not right, and she's not able to go out on a mating flight at the right time. We're gonna have a lot of storms or rain. They won't go out to mate if the weather's not good or if it's too windy, or there's chances that they don't get mated well. So there's things that happen. You really, in some of those, you never are guaranteed that you will have a queen that goes out, mates well, and comes back and can lay for 3 or 4 years.
So when you buy a seed, all that's already done?
When you buy a queen, you're supposed to be getting a queen that's mated and has already been laying some eggs. That's how it's defined. We'll be going over that in the next class.
So how do you know when you have a queen?
Well, for one thing, if you don't have any eggs or larvae, you don't have a queen. You don't have a queen. Well, except this time of year, the hives are basically dormant. So the queen usually quits laying as soon as it starts getting really cold. About mid-November, she'll stop laying, and then usually, depending upon the weather, of course, they will start laying again, usually late February.
How do you pick the queen out? She the one that's dressed?
Yeah, I wouldn't be going over that. Yeah, she's when you're looking through, thousands and thousands of bees, it's sometimes it's really hard even for an experienced beekeeper sometimes to spot the queen. But there is a difference in the way she looks, and we'll go over that. She's got one job. Her job is to lay eggs, and in order to ensure the other bees in the hive that she is there and she's doing her job, she releases pheromone signals within the hive. In fact, worker bees will come up and they will get the pheromone from her and spread it through the hive to let everybody in the hive know that all is well, the queen lives, all is well. If the queen's pheromones start declining, that actually triggers the bees in the hive to start producing the queen. So, and once you become more experienced in this, you can use those things in order to learn how to produce your own queen. So, normally, she's the only active reproducing female in the hive. And I say normally because for every rule, there are exceptions. But because these colonies are like, they have their own personalities. And sometimes, you know, these personalities will do, you know, some things that we kind of consider kind of weird. But
Does that have to do perhaps with some invasive traits?
it could be that, it could be, well, since the queen mates with multiple drones, all the worker bees in there are all half-sisters. And then also you have cases of what they call drifting, where if say a hive fails, and, you know, the bees, they lose their queen, something happens, you know, they don't all just go, it's over, we're gonna die. If they go to another hive, and they have resources, so if they're bringing in nectar or pollen or, you know, anything that hive needs, a lot of times the guard bees at the entrance will let them in. Oh, you got some good nectar there. Yeah, sure, come in. You can be a assistant. You show up at the hive with empty-handed going, gimme, 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 and they go, out of here. You know, they'll chase them off. But if you show up with resources, a lot of times, you know, that hive will accept you in. Once you're accepted into that hive, you pick up that queen's pheromones and the scent of that hive, and then you can pass through the door anytime you want.
Can they be, different hives be competitive?
Oh,
Or,
yeah.
I mean, but would they be so competitive that they might war against each other?
Oh, yeah, that happens. You have robbing scenarios, things like that. Where if they sense a hive is weak, they'll come in to try to steal their resources. That happens, and that'll be in the management part where we'll talk about, you know, some of the things you can do to prevent that from happening. But it happens. But once, you know, because of the queen's pheromones, every hive has a distinctive smell, and the guard bees at the entrances will check out the smell of any bee coming in, and if they don't smell right, they won't let them in the door. And that includes if they're sick and they have a bad smell, they might not let them in. Worker bees are sexually underdeveloped for the most part. They have not developed to where they're from a fertilized eggs, but they have they weren't fed royal jelly the entire time that they were a larva, and because of that, they do not develop a spermacadium. But they can lay eggs in certain conditions, which you want to try to avoid. But she has a stinger. She can sting only once because she'll die after stinging. They're called worker bees because that's what they do. They collect food, water for the colony. They build wax combs. They do the housework. They maintain the interior temperatures of the hive. They guard the hive against intruders. They feed the larvae. They worker forager bees. They won't usually sting because they're not protecting the hive. So, you know, when you have bees that are visiting flowers, you can usually brush through them, walk through them. They won't try to sting because they only sting for a couple of reasons, and that's to protect the hive and to protect the species. If you grab a bee or step on it, yeah, it's going to sting because it's teaching you that you shouldn't step or grab a bee to protect the species. But otherwise, you know, I've had, you know, bees land on me all the time and walk around and, you know, see if I taste good, and, you know, then they fly off. Or they might be attracted to, you know, colored shirts, especially in the wintertime. You wear a bright, floral colored shirt, come over and land on me. Like, ooh, is there anything good here? Yeah, maybe. So, from the time that a bee emerges, their first job is usually to clean out their own cell that they just emerged from. So they'll come out and then they'll start cleaning and polishing that cell to get it ready for the queen to lay in again. Then they'll start eating a lot of what we call bee bread, which is pollen that has been preserved in the hive, and that's their protein. They'll feed on that, and that makes it to where they can produce royal jelly and worker jelly, which they have glands in their mandibles and on their head that produces this bee food. The royal jelly is fed to every larva the first 3 days after they hatch. It takes 3 days as an egg, 3 days as they are fed royal jelly. Then they're switched over to a combination of worker jelly and maybe a little nectar. And that's the difference between whether it becomes a queen or a worker. Because if it's a queen, she is fed royal jelly the entire time. She's fed royal jelly her entire life. And that's where she gets her longevity and her ability to develop a spermacapia in order to produce fertilizer. Workers can produce eggs if needed, but they will always be grown and unfertilized. So then for a short period of time, they're able to produce wax from their wax glands on the bottom of their abdomen, and then they can use that wax to build honeycomb. They also have some of them that are doing house bees. They are retrieving food from incoming foragers. The worker bees that are out foraging will come in just basically to the entrance of the hive, and they offload the nectar to other bees, and it's passed around until it's placed into the cell. And as it's passed from bee to bee, it adds enzymes that help change the chemical structure of the sugars in the nectar so that it can be converted to honey. So, in the meantime, they're doing things like garden hives, removing corpses of bees because bees will die. Then about the last half or 2 or 3 weeks of their life, then they're forager bees. And the forager bees, of course, they take the most risks as far as being out in the environment because they're out there, they're collecting nectar, pollen, and water. So it's the oldest bees in the hive that are the ones that are out foraging. Those are also the ones that can be more aggressive.
How far do they go?
They can go up to, they usually go up to 2 miles in every direction.
Further go, more everything.
But you have more flowers and
They'll stay closer, if you have, that's, commercial beekeepers, they really make their money off of pollination services. They don't make money off of honey. There's a lot of those monoculture honeys like almond honey, doesn't really taste all that good. A lot of that honey ends up in your, hair products, lotions, and things like that. It's not really good tasting honey unless sometimes they'll blend it with other honeys. But they prefer to stick within that 2 miles out in every direction because they have to fly a lot further. So they're burning up more energy to go collect than they're actually bringing in. So, young worker bees are often called nurse bees. That's because they're the ones that produce the royal jelly and the worker jelly. They spend about the first 20 days in the hive learning various tasks. Royal jelly is produced in the glands. Wax comes from 4 pairs of wax glands under the abdomen, and they produce like little tiny sheets of wax that has to be manipulated with their mandibles in order to be formed into those perfect little 6-sided cells that are uniform in size and what they're needed. That to me is kind of amazing because it's the strongest sport that you could possibly do as far, and they're doing it with little bitty pieces of wax that they produce. The jobs are elastic. If an older bee is called on to return to a task that a younger bee is normally, assigned, they can do that. Normally in the summertime, a worker bee lives about 5 to 6 weeks. So that's one of the reasons why that queen is constantly laying to replace lost worker bees. But what's weird is in the wintertime, that changes. The biology of a bee that's meant to survive the winter has more fat bodies and is able to survive the whole winter and then be able to take care of young larvae in the spring because of the fat bodies that they store out. Nurse bees, 1 to 12 days, they out grooming, they clean cells, they feed brood. House bees, from about 10 to 20 days old, they build comb, they clean the hives, they accept nectar and pollen from foragers. They're undertaker bees, they guard the hives, and they do climate control. And sometimes based on the genetics of the actual bees, they will be assigned tasks that they are better at. So you have some worker bees in there that are better at collecting protein. You have some bees that are better at collecting water. So these jobs, the colony actually knows which bees are going to be best to do certain jobs. Field bees from about 20 days until death, they're the ones that's out collecting nectar, pollen, water, and plant resins. The plant resins is what they use to create protein. Workers can control the temperatures in the hives. The brood areas during the summertime are kept at approximately 93 degrees. Summer worker bees, of course, only live about 6 weeks. Winter worker bees live 4 to 5 months. The bees can warm the hive in the winter by clustering together, and they don't flap their wings. They can vibrate their thorax and wing muscles in order to, it's kind of like shivering, in order to generate heat. And then in the summertime, they will bring in water and put it along the edges of the cells and then fan their wings to create evaporative cooling. And even though as an insect they're a cold-blooded, animal, they have learned how to create their own environmental system in order to try and keep the temperature around 93 degrees when it's, brood season. In the wintertime, they can survive with much cooler temperatures, but they still try to keep the queen in the center of their clusters to keep her warmer, because if she gets too cold, it can damage the sperm that she has stored in her spermacavia, and then she will be unable to lay in the spring. And if she's unable to lay in the spring, that is the death of that hive. But I'm going over some on this, but this is more inside. They have a lot of different pheromone glands on their bodies. They have pheromones in their feet. They have they have a gland in their tail that is releases an alarm pheromone, and also a kind of a come hither type pheromone that tells bees that may not be able to find the hive where they are, like when they do swarms, or when you're putting bees or new boxing new bees into a new hive. They will a lot of times fan pheromones to help tell their sisters where they are, where to come in. They've got a separate honey stomach that they store nectar in, so that adds enzymes to it, and then they basically regurgitate that back out. Now, if you'd known that when you was a kid, you probably would have never eaten any honey. So they've got a mandibular gland. That's where the royal jelly is produced. This gland right up here, that's where worker jelly is produced. They have saliva glands. They have footprint glands. The queen bee actually has her glands on her feet that when she puts down the pheromones from that helps inhibit worker bees from being able to lay eggs. We've got this gland here, that's the alarm gland. And they've got this gland, it's kind of the come hither gland. They've got saliva glands. You've got glands all over because they communicate via chemical odors.
Going back to last time, has poison animals?
The what now?
Has poison
Oh yeah, that's your poison gland. If you get stung, actually, because those barbs will lock into your skin, when the bee will pull away, it actually pulls that poison gland out, and she leaves the barb behind, and that poison gland will pump that poison into your skin, which is what causes the irritation, the itching, the burning, and the swelling.
Venom.
Yeah, it's a venom.
The queen also has a stinger.
The queen has a stinger, but she only uses that in order to eliminate possible rival queens. So when there might be several queen cells in a hive, whichever queen emerges first will go around, chew holes in the cells of the other queen cells, and then she will sting that queen, kill her. Sometimes though, even the worker bees, once they know they got a new queen and they've accepted her, sometimes they'll go ahead and tear her down themselves too.
Worker bee, kill another worker bee, don't want to hide.
Yes, they'll ball them up and sting them. And they can sting other insects multiple times because their barbs are sticking them. So like if a wasp tries to invade the hive, which happens sometimes, they'll ball it up and sting it. If a mouse tries to get in the hive, a lot of times they'll ball it up, they'll sting it to death, and then if they can't remove it, which they usually can't because it's too big, they will remove every hair from the body and then completely coat it with propolis in order to keep it from contaminating their hive. They use the propolis to seal up cracks and to coat anything that's bad. If they find a cell of honey or something has gone bad, they'll usually cap it over or propolis it over. That's their propolis is their medicine cap, and and they're protected.
How about a large scorpion in one of our hives? They handle a scorpion or not? How about, well,
Yeah, I haven't had any problems with scorpions getting in mine, but I'm sure, you know, if it came in and started causing problems, sometimes they'll let something come in a little bit and you know, they'll kind of ignore it if it's not doing any harm. But if it's doing any harm, I've seen ants come up and like get in the inner covers, or I had some problems with them getting into my lids. But and as long as they don't try to get in the hive, they usually don't mess with them too much. But if they do try to get in the hive, a lot of times they'll remove it. Okay, I already talked about this a little bit. This is the royal jelly, and if you look close here, you can see here's the brand new little larva, and they're literally floating. You know, if it's a good, healthy hive, they're floating in royal jelly that first 3 days. And what these larvae will do is it'll just turn and just continually eat until it starts getting larger and larger, and eventually it'll fill up the whole cell. And then after it does that, then it'll start standing up and then go into the pupa. Wax glands. I wish these pictures were showing up a little clearer. But there's like 4 glands here, and at a certain age, the bees will start producing these little teeny tiny flakes. This is on the bottom side of the abdomen. So they have the foot glands for worker orientation, finding nectar, queen. It prohibits queen cell production, and it also prohibits workers from producing eggs. Now, this is for defense and reproduction, nest recognition for other bees. It's close to where the stinger is. This gland is the alarm pheromone gland. That's, you know, if one bee in that hive decides that there's a problem, they'll put off the pheromones from this gland, and you'll see them. They'll stick their abdomen up in the air, and you can see where this little gland is exposed, and kind of smells a little bit about like bananas, and that smell will tell all the other bees in the hive we're under attack. You want to avoid that. One of the reasons why you use a smoker is to mask that alarm pheromone.
Call that a backup alarm?
Yeah, it is kind of a backup alarm. Yeah. Yeah. So the legs of the bees, you have a little deal on their front legs right here. It's an antenna cleaner, so they can clean pollen and stuff off their antennas. They also have little claws. They have all this little hairs here they can use to not only clean the antennas, but to comb the pollen off. And then they comb that pollen off, and it's fascinating watching them take that pollen, comb it off, and then they'll transfer it to the 2 middle legs, and then from there they'll transfer it back to their pollen baskets while they're flying. You can see them do that. We have like dry pollen feeders, and we'll use those. You know, if you go out and watch the bees when they go to these dry pollen feeders, you'll see them. They'll bite into the pollen and then loosen it up, take it, comb it, and then move it to their back legs while they're flying. You just stand there and watch them do it. It's fascinating. So they've got pollen rakes and pollen press and pollen comb inside the hind leg. And they can work all these things in order to put those grains of pollen into the hairs of their pollen basket. So the workers have a separate stomach used to carry nectar and water. What's interesting about that is that stomach can swell to fill up almost the entire abdomen. And if they're really, really, like for instance, I've got like a pond that I put in that has like a little stream, and the bees love running water. So they'll come over and they'll land at the rocks, and then they'll walk down to the edge, and they'll fill up their stomach with water to take back. So they'll fly in high, and then they fly out low, and they're loaded up water tankers. And when they go back into the hive, they will collect whatever is taken the fastest. So whatever's needed in the hive, you know, the worker bees inside will give priority to. So if they have plenty of water at that particular period, and they have a bunch of bees that come back in with water, they might not take it from them initially. So those bees that have water, you know, they're like little water takers. They'll just kind of line up and wait until, you know, somebody comes to accept the water and take it from them. Same thing's true, you know, if they need water really bad at that time because the hive's getting hot, they'll take the water and they'll make the bees that are bringing in nectar and pollen, they might make them wait for a while. Okay, so I talked about the enzymes that start converting the nectar into honey.
But you could, so you have a water feature that you water your bees with?
The bees like that. I also put out chicken water deals and then put sticks in it in the bee yard, but they really prefer my pond at the back because I've got like a little pond out by my back windows in my bedroom, and I've got a pump that brings the water up and puts it in there, and then I've got a little stream that runs down, and then there's a smaller pond that has a pump that picks it up and then takes it up to the top. So in a couple of areas I've got some really shallow spots, which the birds love to take bird baths and get drinks. But then the bees, I put rocks all the way around. The bees come in, land on the rocks, and they go down the edges of the rocks and then suck up water basically all around the pond. So it's like a major highway there with bees coming and going and coming and going all the time. And, you know, when we get a lot of rainfall and there's rain in the ditches and stuff, I'll see bees there. But when we don't have that, they love that running water because it's the same reason the birds love it. It seems fresher because it's moving. So, but you know, I won't tell you that you all have to put in a water feature like that. You don't. But you do have to provide water for your bees in some way. Well, I mean, it's nice if you know, the closer they are, the less energy they have to expend to go get it. If the nearest water source is 2 miles away, think about how much energy and resources they're using to collect that water. So, no, if they're doing water, they're filling up that honey stomach with nothing but water. You know, in reverse, in the wintertime, if it's too cold for them to get out, they can use that same area in their abdomen, not the stomach, but the same area to hold their frass, which is the term for insect food. They can hold their frass for an enormous amount of time until it is warm enough for them to go outside and do what they call a cleansing flight. Now, in our area, that's not a big deal because we have enough warm days that they don't have to hold it like that. But up north, where they're trapped in a hive for months, a lot of times they're having to hold that for months. And that's why up there they have more problems with dysentery. The bees have problems like that because they can't have their cleansing flight. So in that way, we're really lucky to be in Texas where we have pretty mild winters, because I haven't heard anybody that has had any problems with any type of dysentery in their hive.
As far as water, up here in this area, that's been down the high density populated area. You've got, if your place doesn't have a tank or a pool or a pond, I'm sure your neighbor's got one that they can rely on. So, down in the populated area, don't rent a swimming pool. You got a swimming pool next to an agri yard.
Of course, that can cause some aggravation with your neighbors. Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit, but, you know, if you don't have anything close by, you know, I've had people that I've mentored, they've just taken and put tubs out with rocks so that they can, you know, land and then walk down, and just kept those tubs full of water.
Especially important when you got a drought going on.
Yeah, when you got a drought going on, you know, they just kind of migrated to my ponds, even though, you know, the neighbors behind me have a big tank, the neighbors all around me have tanks. You know, it's closer, and they like the moving water. You know, they really like that over, you know, stagnant water. But, you know, you just need to, you know, provide them a water source with a way that they can land and get to it without slipping the ground. Is what it amounts to. I've seen people that just, you know, put down some rocks and then put an old dirty wash rag there that stayed moist, and they'd suck water from the dirty wash rag. I've had bees that have come to potted plants and just suck the moisture out of the soil around potted plants. You do need to provide them some sort of water source. Nectar is 80% water, therefore honey is only 19% water. To make a pound of honey, a colony of bees collects nectar from over 1 million flowers. And then that nectar, when they bring it back, there's been added enzymes to it, but then they use evaporation by flapping their wings in the summertime in order to dehydrate it down to the correct moisture percentage, and when it gets to the correct moisture percentage, they cap the cells. Communication. A bee discovers a food source. She returns home and tells her sisters where it is, how far, and how good. She'll give out samples. Say, hey, I found this source. Here's a little taste of what the nectar's like. So that's why they will focus in whatever the best source is. But they will communicate this by dancing on top of the hive. And based on how far up, which way they turn, and in the directions, it tells the other bees in the hive where the good source is. And they can communicate this pretty well. And of course, she'll use the nectar samples as a way to recruit bees to go out and, you know, forager bees to go out and collect. And there's books written on this. The drones. Drones are the males in the colony. They're produced from an unfertilized egg. The head is large, and the eyes predominate the head. So they've got big eyes to see with. The rear end of the drone is very rounded. They have no stinger. They cannot sting. They don't work. They don't feed others. They don't produce or collect anything. Worker bees care for them. Although they're usually considered worthless, They contribute to the continuation of one generation to the next. The drones are what they call haploid, and they have half of the genetics of the queen. And their real purpose is to spread the genetics of the queen so that she can spread her genetics to other hives. Drones will drift into other hives and are normally welcome. They say, come on in. Bachelors are welcome. So they'll let them in. They'll feed them. So they'll drift from one hive to another on a regular basis. Now in the wintertime, if things are, resources are short, they'll kick them out of the hive and they'll end up starving to death, freezing to death. Because since they don't contribute anything to the hive, they're not considered valuable in the wintertime. Even though I have had some queens in some hives that will allow drones to overwinter. Usually they're ones that have plenty of resources. So you open up one hive and you'll have lots of little bachelors running around in there that aren't really doing anything, for a living. But the other hives won't have any. But since this one hive, never let them in, the word gets around and they go over there and they hang out. So drones, unfertilized eggs from its mother only, one half of the genetic material in the worker bees. His lifespan depends on the health of the colony. During poor honey flows and honey shortages, drones may be driven from the hive. This happens a lot of times at the onset of winter. Drones can be created by laying worker honeybees. It's kind of like the last, they don't have a way to produce another queen. There's no queen pheromones in the hive. A lot of times you'll have a worker bee that will start laying. They don't have a long enough abdomen, so a lot of times they're laying on the sides of the cell. Sometimes they'll put more than one egg in a cell because they really don't have any experience or knowledge in how to do this properly. And of course they can't fertilize it, so if it's raised up, they'll be drones. And that's one way to tell you if you had a queenless hive for a while. If you open it up and there's nothing but drone cells in there, you got a problem to deal with. Drones do not survive mating. When they mate, it ends up they lose their junk, and that's the end for them.
So is that when the queen is on her mating flight, that's who she's mating up with?
Right. And when the queen goes on her mating flight, at first she won't do it immediately. She'll go out and she'll do orientations to make sure she can find her way back. She'll, determine based on, where the sun is and different landmarks, because she needs to make it back to her hive, because if she goes back to the wrong one, that's not a good scenario. So she'll do some orientation flights, strengthen her wings. As soon as she emerges, she does not go on a mating flight. She'll spend several days in the hive, or sometimes even a couple of weeks in the hive, walking around, gaining strength, getting prepared. But then when it's time for her to go, she does the orientation flight, and the drones will create drone congregation areas. And they have not figured out how they know where these are, but they know how they are, just like young adults know exactly where the beer joints and the bars are to go meet other young adults. So they know where these drone congregations areas are, and the queen will fly out and the drones will go in circles, and they usually go out early afternoon, around 2 o'clock or so, and they'll go out, and for several hours They go to this congregation area and they just do loops like this. Just fly around in circles. And the queens, when they come in, usually a virgin queen, they can go out more than one day to mate. If they don't mate enough the first day, they'll go out and do it more than one day. But she comes in and she just flies right up through the center. And then, of course, the drones all try to catch her, and whichever one catches her, they mate with her, and they have to basically revert their palace in order to do that. So it takes almost every bit of the hemoglyph in their body just to produce the palace correctly. And then they will mate. And then they literally pass out, fall off the back, and they break it off and leave it in there. So then the queen goes, well, that was fun, let's do this again. So she goes around, she'll fly up through the middle of them again. The next drone will capture, remove the palace, and then mate with her, same thing. So this goes on several times. Once she is finished for that day, she goes back to the hive, and the workers will remove the palace. So.
How often do you have to do that at one time?
She does that once in her lifetime. And then she has this special organ called the spermacavia that she stores that sperm in. And that's why it's really important that you have a nice, large, healthy queen that has a large spermacavia, and that she is kept at the right temperatures in order to preserve that sperm in the right conditions so that she can use. And then she can control whether or not when she lays an egg, whether or not that egg is fertilized.
Now, what you just described is not the same as a swarm.
No.
Okay.
No, this is not a swarm at all. This is
Okay.
part of the mating rituals of queen bees.
And usually about what time of year?
Usually in the spring.
Okay.
So, you know, the first larva that's usually laid in the hive in the spring, a lot of it's drone larvae.
About what time would the swarm occur?
Well, we'll go through swarms in the next class,
Okay.
but in more detail. The swarms, if the swarm plans on surviving, it's usually in the spring, and it's due to the bees believing that the hive is strong enough to reproduce. Because with beehives, reproduction is not making more worker bees. Reproduction is making more colonies. So, this is out of the Beekeeping for Dummies chart, and I should have printed some of those out today, but I didn't. I will print some out and give you copies of these. I think I did it in the last class last time. But this is something you will need to memorize over time. A queen bee. First 3 days, it's an egg. Then the next 8 days, it's a larva, and then it's capped. It goes into the pupa stage. 16 days later, the queen emerges. Worker bee. First 3 days, an egg. Then the next, up to 8 days, the next 5 days, larva, pupa, and then it takes 21 days for a worker bee to emerge. Drones, first 3 days is an egg. They got another extra couple of days as a larva, and then it takes 24 days for a drone. The main ones you'll need to memorize is 16 days for queen, 21 days for worker bees. So if you introduce a brand new queen, it's going to take 21 days after she starts laying before you see the first new bees from her. So,
So when you start your hive, do you have bees that come with the queen, or is it in all by itself?
it depends on what you buy. Yeah, we're gonna cover that next time. Okay. Royal jelly, the first 3 days is the larva. All fertilized queen eggs have the potential of being queens, eggs and larvae. So when you look down in these cells here, it's kind of hard to see. Right here, there's little eggs. They're usually laid really close to the center, in the bottom of the cell. When they hatch out, there's just this little teeny tiny dot here. And then as they get older, these over here are about this size. And when the queen lays, she usually starts in the center of her frame and then goes around in concentric circles, filling in. So the ones in the middle that sort of start laying, they're usually larger, and then out at the edges you have your eggs. Once the ones in the center emerge, the queen will go back and she'll start laying in the center again. That's considered a good pattern. So when you look at a frame that has larvae on it, cap cells, these are all capped cells with bee larvae. Up here in the corner is stored honey. They usually store some honey and pollen really close, because once these worker bees start hatching out, they're going to need to be fed honey and pollen right away, so they usually put some on the frame. So, on this particular brood frame is one that they consider close to ideal. Capped larvae, capped honey, and the cells that are open, either, they weren't suitable, or they may have bee bread in there. Bee bread is pollen that has been changed into bee bread. The bees do not eat the pollen in a raw form. What they do is they'll pack it into cells. They'll drop the bulb down there and then pack it in with their heads, add some enzymes to it, and sometimes they'll put a little bit of honey in there, which causes natural yeast to start modifying the pollen and breaking down the pollen's coating that's on the pollen cell to make it palatable to the bees. So they eat bee bread. They actually eat the raw pollen. They turn it into bread. So they'll store a lot of pollen a lot of times real close to the cells, because those young bees, when they first come out, they have to eat a lot of protein in order to get their food glands on their head to start operating. So, drum cells versus worker cells. On this frame, this is the worker cells. Drones, because they're a lot larger, they have to have a larger cell. So a lot of times they'll put the drone cells over here at the corners or along the bottom. In the spring, and they try to raise a lot of drones. A lot of times, if you've got double boxes, they'll put them between the boxes on the bottoms of the frames, because they need to have larger cells. So, when is a new queen made? During swarming, which is natural colony reproduction. As a beekeeper, you want to avoid swarming, because when the existing queen is usually the first one to leave. She will leave, and she'll take about half the bees with her. So that's a pretty large loss. So you want to try to avoid that, and we're going to be talking about that during the hive management next The other time that when a new queen's usually made is if there's an emergency. If something happens to the queen, or they can tell that she is failing, you know, she's not laying as well, that she doesn't have as strong a pheromone, then they will create emergency queen cells. Queen cells, they're normally found along the center of a given frame for supersedure. And supersedure is when they have a existing queen that is failing. That's a supersedure cell. And in that case, the nurse bees select a worker bee cell and they convert that into queen cells. And they usually do several of them. That's a sign that you have a queen that's failing. Sometimes you'll see these in your hive. That's a queen cup. That doesn't necessarily mean that unless you find a larva in there, that they're trying to create a queen right then. A lot of times they'll have these around just in case. So this is usually what a supersedure queen cell looks like. It's like a peanut. But they'll take an existing larva. So you'll have this kind of a peanut-shaped thing. Now, swarm cells are usually different because the queen is involved with this. It's something that the hive is doing on purpose. So normally, with a swarm cell, they will be along the bottoms of the frame. So they'll put them in there at the bottom. So here's a queen cell that's not capped. Here's one that's capped and ready to go. This is one that they haven't capped it yet. So it's getting close to it though. These are drone cells right here.
So that can kind of give you an indication that you're going to experience a swarm?
Yeah. And usually by the time they're capped, you may have already had one.
So you want to get rid of them?
Maybe, it depends. I mean, sometimes you want to use those to create new hives. You know, that's part of the management thing. But it's something you want to be aware of and to watch for. Then it's up to the individual beekeeper how you want to deal with it, or if you want to do it.
So if you have a hive that experiences a swarm, you've lost half your bees, maybe if you had another queen that you could put in or introduce into that hive and perhaps keep it viable.
If the queen swarms and takes half your bees,
Yep.
she is left behind these swarm cells.
Okay.
New queens, new daughters
Got
to take over.
Okay.
Of course, whichever one comes out first, and in this case it'd probably be this one, because it's already
That's
capped.
not an indication that a swarm is about to happen. It's probably already happened.
Yeah, that
Gotcha.
either it's already happened or it's going to happen really soon.
Well, it doesn't mean you're going to lose time. Be generous.
Yeah, because before that queen can leave, and actually sometimes it's the worker bees that decide whether or not there's going to be a swarm. You know, the queen, her job, lay eggs, distribute queen pheromone. So it's the colony that actually has decided whether or not to swarm. Hey, we're doing really great. A lot of resources are coming in. We have a high population. It's time for us to make a new hive. So the queen will, lay in the cells that's going to be swarm cells. Then she will quit laying. And the worker bees will chase her around in the hive to make her lose weight, because when she's really rabid with all these eggs and laying constantly 24 hours a day, she can't fly very well. So she'll quit laying and she will lose weight. They will chase her around in there, and they'll quit feeding her as much. So diet and exercise will make you lose weight.
Yeah.
And then once, you know, once she's ready to fly, then a lot of times they will nibble on her legs and stuff and basically force her out of the hive. So that's what produces the swarm. But now you've lost about half your bees. Now when these swarm cells come out, these queens have a choice. They can either kill the other queens and take over the hive, or sometimes they'll swarm too.
Wow.
And then that takes another, you know,
Another half your work.
yeah. I had one time that created 5 queen cells and every one of them swarmed. I had nothing left in there.
Did you eat out some of the swarm cells? Did you do a couple of
Still depends.
Yeah, it depends. We'll go over that more next. Well, actually, that's more the last class. We'll talk about it as far as hive management, and then we'll talk more about it when we talk about queens and rearing queens. But this is just something for you to keep an eye on. You know, at the first year, you probably won't have to worry about this at all unless you buy established hives from somebody. You won't have to worry because they're too busy building up the first year to produce queen cells. You know, unless they create, you know, supersede your cell because you lost a queen. And that happens sometimes too because, you know, new beekeepers sometimes accidentally squish a queen, or we call it rolling them. You know, when they put a frame back in, the queen, you know, runs over to the edge, you can accidentally mash her, and you'll see something like this. Or she'll also see other signs like we don't have any eggs or larvae in here. There's ways to tell, but you just need to be able to recognize that, you know, these are queen cells, or the difference between queen cells and drone cells. Your knitter will also help you with recognizing that when you're looking in new hives. Okay. So, in all cases, the selected fertilized future queen larvae are housed in larger cells and fed large amounts of royal jelly throughout their larval and adult lives. Honeybees are highly socialized. They have an overlap of generations. They have a division of labor. They have cooperative rearing of young, and they have a caste system. Honeybees live in a colony of many individuals whose joint effort is required for survival. They may number from 20,000 to 60,000 in a colony. Population of the colony depends on factors such as the egg-laying ability of the queen, the space available in the hive, and the incoming food supply. Bee rules. From the bee's standpoint, they need a dry cavity with enough space for them to build their comb and survive. They need flowers, they need water, and they need to control pests. That's why, you know, people end up with bees in the eaves of their house and the walls of their house. They end up in water meter boxes because all they have to do is meet their rules, and it's a good place to live. Any questions? Lots of questions?
Is there any benefits to stinging?
There are people that use bees for what's called apitherapy, and they will purposely sting themselves, especially people with like arthritis. A lot of times they will use bee sting therapy. I've been told that people that have Lyme disease, that it helps them. So there are people that buy bees and they buy them in little individual containers and purposely sting themselves. As a beekeeper, you will be stung. You know, at some point in time, you're going to be stung. You might as well expect that. I have found with myself that, especially now since I've been stung so many times, now if I get stung on my hands, an hour later, I can't even tell you where I was stung. If I get stung on my arms, if I get stung maybe here, I might get a little bit of swelling. If I get stung here, I usually don't have hardly any reaction. If I get stung around my eyes, I'll usually get some swelling. If I get stung on my belly, I usually get a little bite. If I take a Benadryl, and if it's wanting to swell a little bit, I'll rub an ice cube on it.
How does a bee sting compare to a wasp sting? About the same?
Bee stings are much milder. Wasps do not have barbs on their stingers. They can sting you multiple times. Yeah, they prefer light colors.
It's something they evolved in. I guess bears robbing their hives, they associate something dark as a threat. So light colored, that's one reason bee suits are white, once they're cool.
I had a red hat and a red shirt on as a pest control technician one time, and I was about. I was just visiting with a bee man that was working on removing a hive from a house.
Yeah.
And I was just visiting with the man, and I was probably 40 yards away or so on the opposite side of the house from the
They
house.
came for you.
And he came for me anyway. I only got stung once, but I didn't get hit.
Yeah. Well, I've been told by reading things by Randy Oliver, they do not like wool socks. They'll get you with the wool socks.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you wear certain colognes and stuff, that can upset them.
You're talking about the alarm pheromone kind of smells like bananas. Don't eat a bunch of bananas and then go out there and breathe on your hive.
Well, or use banana oil.
Banana oil.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, floral scented hair products, perfumes, can either attract them or upset them. Different scents. I mean, I use unscented laundry detergent and stuff in my clothing. For some reason, they like to sting my husband. I was out cutting tree limbs and stuff and pruning with chainsaws out really close, like from here to Byron in my bee yard. They weren't bothering me at all. I had no protection. My husband came walking up and about back where they are at the back, and a bee went over there, nailed him. You never know exactly what's going to trigger them, but
You had a question, Christine?
they, scents can affect them. I'd bought some honey and lavender bath soap, homemade honey, and I noticed that whenever I go out in the garden, I had bees landing all over me. I had to discontinue using that soap in the summertime because evidently there was enough honey and lavender scent in it that they came over and thought I might have something tasty. And, I knew that eventually I'd accidentally pinch one and threaten them and I'd get stung. So you got to be careful about strong scents. They really can't see red. They can see an ultraviolet. Blue is usually seen as white, but dark colors like this, they think you're a bear. Even though we don't have bears here, they think you're a bear. They really hate my daughter's German Shepherd. All it has to do is come out and sit close, and they'll go over and get it.
So the color of your T-shirts are unfortunate.
Well,
Yeah.
they just look good with the logo.
They're
And I don't-
fashionistas.
Yeah. I think, some people say they think that they do. They get to recognize you.
If you're around them enough, they get used to your pheromones, if you will. I had one old beekeeper told me he takes a pair of old socks or an old shirt and he lays them out around the entrance to the hive. So every time they come and go, they get used to his smell, and then he has less problems with them.
you probably need to do something like that. If it's just you counting on you frequenting the hive, they only live long enough to, you know, you'd have to do it all day long. But putting something like that, with your clothing out there around the hive, might help them get used to your pheromones, and then they don't recognize you as something different when you come out.
Any other questions? Yeah, yeah. Where I have my out yard, you know, the neighbors on both sides have, you know, tanks for their cattle, and I don't provide any water there for them because they're close enough by that I know they're going there to get water. And
They don't get it from your running water, they'll get it from there or something.
well, from in my out yard.
Oh, out yard, yeah.
In my out yard, you know, I didn't put any kind of water source on that property. Well, the neighbor that's right behind, you know, he's the one that kind of got me hooked up with the lady that I have the bees on her property. And, you know, I already talked to him about it. He said, oh yeah, they'll probably come to my place for the water. He actually has more than one tank on his property for his cattle, so he didn't have a problem with it coming over there. And he had a whole bunch of vitex trees. And I said, yeah, leave those. I love those. Please leave those, the vitex trees. Don't go looking for those about. Well, yeah, I closed that hive up and got out of there quick because I had like 17 stings on my arm through a padded, ventilated suit. They just clustered on my arms and did everything they could to get to me. And they were stinging through leather gloves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
You close it up, walk away, they'll calm down, and you come back, you smoke and be more gentle and that kind of stuff. And
yeah, that would normally work on regular hives.
regular hives.
But with these Africanized bees, walking away and coming back the next day, they were just as
Just
mean.
as mean.
What
That's
about-
why I eliminated them, because
What
I
about
did
dealing
not.
with them at night?
But at night, it's actually going to be worse
Really?
because at night,
I would have figured that.
all the forager bees come home.
Okay.
So,
So the numbers are greater.
The forager bees are the ones that are the most protective of the hive.
When
I
they're
mean,
back at the hive.
they're the old
not
folks. They
protected
don't
out
have
there.
as much to lose, you know. It's like I'm gonna die in a couple weeks anyway. I'll just sting your butt, you know. Did you have to plant flowers?
Let me take this one. I don't care how many acres you've got, okay? The bees are not gonna live on what you plant. Like I said, they'll go out 2 miles. They'll go out 5 miles. A hive can cover 8,000 acres. Okay, they're not going to live or die based upon what you plant. You can plant all you want to. There's bee mixes of flowers and seeds you can get, and it's something you can actually do, but it will not determine the success or failure of your hive. Let's put it with that. After that, plant away. It would take a lot of a certain particular kind of flower to actually flavor the honey. Now, if you've got a peach orchard, I've got 24 peach trees. The first year, our honey had a peachish tinge to it, a flavor that you could detect. After that year, I haven't had detected any particular flavor, but I've got hives all over so many places and we blend it. So it would take a lot of a particular kind of plant to flavor your honey. You got another question in the back?
Kind of going back to the bees kind of congregating
Yeah.
in the body, you know, you see what is that happening, or some of the disease, is that what that's happening? How do you keep them on?
If they're aggressive, Africanized, or a lot of Africanized, they will.
It's gonna happen, it's gonna happen.
Like you said, I mean, if you get a hive that's mad at you and active, I mean, they'll ping you. You'll feel them thump, 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 thump. They're really actively going after you. You just have to walk away. Eventually, you walk and smoke yourself. You can smoke yourself a lot, get away from that hive, and eventually they'll give up and go back to the hive. But, yeah, it can happen.
And can I just add something to that, back to your question? A lot of times when they get really on you, you just shut the lid and take 2 or 3 steps over, they'll leave you, they're just managing. But when you leave and go back up to your house and they're still with you, that should be a good sign.
Yeah.
Or a bad sign, that they're a lot more aggressive, because we've been completely covered with bees, and went over there to the next cart, and we got one. And then we have some hives that we do them last. When we make them mad, they go all the way up to the house with us, and we hang around the barn and get in the shade, and walk around some tree limbs, and destroy them, or we ride the cart around. So again, they may get all over you when you're in the hive. They're just doing their thing. But if they chase you, that should be another indication of how aggressive.
That's when you call your mentor. If you get the phone with it.
Well, this is one of the things that mentors do, is they will teach you how to inspect your hive to make it to where you have less problems. In fact, in that one handout, the basic beekeeping, the last sheet on there kind of gives you a little bit of a synopsis of do's and don'ts and how to inspect a hive. But hopefully, you guys will join and get mentors, talk to Tim about that.
I'd like to make that announcement before we break, that those club members that are looking for members, or looking for mentors, I've got the forms, do a tournament to me, and we'll match you up with somebody in your area or whatever. I'll say it out loud. If you're a new beekeeper, you need a mentor, because that's going to go on for a year basically, and they're going to be able to help you in a lot of ways.
And if you're a member, it's a free service. And
That's
you can
correct.
pay $400 a year to have somebody mentor you. So for $25 membership, you get the bargain.
We can get you matched up with somebody, and by the way, if it turns out that you're not happy with your mentor somewhere down the road, for whatever reason, then you can, again, get back in touch with me, and we'll reassign you, or we'll find out what it is that you need. Jan mentioned earlier, it depends on if you want to be a commercial beekeeper, or a hobbyist, or a natural, if you're going to use all natural remedies. Those are all things to consider. And I have the form, so just see me during the break or the lunch or whatever, and we'll get you matched up, and get you somebody that can help you.
And Melanie's got lunch ready, or student will be ready. So just remember, please be quiet out there during the voting. We don't want to get them too mad at us. And then bring
Grab
your
some food and come
lunch.
back in.
Yeah, grab it and come back in. And then we can talk a lot during